They thought I would walk away quietly, sign the termination papers, and disappear into irrelevance. But on that morning, I didn't leave the company empty-handed. I left with the key to freeze the network they lived and breathed on. And only I knew how to shut it down. My name is Morgan Blake. I'm 38 years old, an American systems engineer who spent 14 years perfecting what would become the most valuable energy optimization algorithm in renewable technology. Until 3 hours ago, I was the director of research and development at Helion Dynamics, a corporation that built its empire on the promise of clean energy solutions. Now I'm unemployed. Technically, the conference room still smelled like Lucas Dryer's expensive cologne when I walked out. 20 minutes earlier, I'd entered that glass-walled chamber expecting to finalize the intellectual property protection contract for my life's work, an algorithm worth at least $2.9 billion in licensing potential. Instead, I found myself across from our new CEO, his legal team, and a termination letter disguised as a restructuring initiative. Nothing personal, Morgan, Lucas had said, sliding the severance package across the mahogany table. The board feels we need fresh perspectives in leadership. Your contributions have been noted. 14 years of innovation, reduced to a footnote. What Lucas didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been expecting this moment for months. Corporate vultures don't circle for years before striking. They plan. They position. And they pounce when their prey is most vulnerable. I had learned to read the signs, the gradual exclusion from strategic meetings, the sudden influx of external consultants, the way my direct reports began copying Lucas on emails that used to be routine. But I had learned something else during my years at Helion. The difference between being prepared and being paranoid is often just a matter of timing. The USB drive in my jacket pocket contained more than just backup files. It held the original source code, the development logs, and most importantly, the digital fingerprints that proved authorship. Every line of code bore my signature. Every optimization carried my methodology. Every breakthrough could be traced back to my laboratory notes. More critically, every licensing agreement existed under a corporate structure that Lucas had never bothered to investigate. I walked through the lobby without looking back. The security guard who had greeted me every morning for 6 years avoided eye contact. The receptionist who usually asked about my weekend plans suddenly found her computer screen fascinating. Word traveled fast in corporate environments, not the truth, but the narrative that management wanted to circulate. By the time I reached my car, I already had 17 missed calls from industry contacts. The story was simple. Helion Dynamics had terminated their R&D director to streamline operations ahead of a major IPO announcement. The algorithm that would anchor their public offering was now fully under company control. Except it wasn't. The drive home took 43 minutes through Chicago traffic. But my mind was already 3 steps ahead. I had built contingencies into my work from the beginning, not out of paranoia, but out of experience. This wasn't my first corporate betrayal. It was just the first one that mattered enough to fight back. My mother had taught me that lesson, though she never lived to see how I would apply it. Dr. Elena Blake had been a brilliant electrical engineer who spent her career watching men take credit for her innovations. She died when I was 26, 6 months before the power grid restoration project that would have finally given her the recognition she deserved. The night she passed, I was in the control room of the Northeast Grid Operations Center, implementing her load-balancing algorithms to prevent a cascading failure that would have left 30 million people without power during the worst blizzard in recorded history. The newspapers called it a triumph of corporate engineering. Helion Dynamics, still a young company then, received congressional commendations for their innovative approach to crisis management. My mother's name appeared nowhere in the coverage, just the executive team that had approved the deployment of company-developed solutions. That was when I learned the difference between creating value and capturing credit. I spent the next 12 years building systems that were too complex for anyone else to understand, too integrated for anyone else to replicate, and too valuable for anyone else to ignore. But I also built them with kill switches, backdoors, and dependencies that existed outside the corporate structure. The most important dependency was Ardent Grid Limited, a Luxembourg-based holding company that I had established 7 years ago. On paper, it was a licensing and consulting firm specializing in energy systems optimization. In practice, it was a legal fortress designed to protect intellectual property from exactly the kind of corporate theft I had just experienced. Every major implementation of my algorithm, from the wind farms in Denmark to the solar arrays in Australia, operated under licensing agreements with Ardent Grid, not Helion Dynamics. The contracts were structured as sublicenses, with Helion acting as the primary implementation partner, but not the ultimate rights holder. Lucas and his legal team had never bothered to read the fine print. They assumed that acquiring the algorithm meant acquiring all associated rights and revenue streams. They were wrong. More importantly, they had triggered a clause that I had built into every licensing agreement, the ethical compliance provision. If any party attempted to remove my name from the patent documentation or misrepresent the origins of the technology, all licensing agreements would automatically terminate. At 4:47 p.m., I received an email from the United States Patent and Trademark Office confirming that my name had been removed from patent application US 201802457881 at the request of Helion Dynamics. The filing now listed the company as the sole inventor and rights holder. That was the moment Lucas Dreyer made his first critical mistake. By 5:15 p.m., I was logged into the Ardent Grid management system, reviewing the status of 48 active licensing agreements across 17 countries. Every status indicator showed green, active, and compliant. Every payment stream showed current. Every technical integration showed optimal performance, except for one. Helion Dynamics master license now displayed a red warning flag. Ethical compliance violation. Immediate review required. The beauty of long-term planning is that you can afford to be patient. I had spent 7 years building a network of relationships, contracts, and dependencies that would be impossible to replicate quickly. Every major energy company in North America, Europe, and Asia had integrated my algorithms into their core infrastructure. Every grid operator, every renewable energy producer, every smart city initiative relied on code that ultimately traced back to servers controlled by Ardent Grid. Lucas could steal my job, steal my recognition, and steal my official role in the company. But he couldn't steal the foundation I had built outside his reach. I spent the evening reviewing financial projections and legal precedents. Helion's IPO was scheduled for 3 weeks away. With the energy optimization algorithm positioned as the company's primary asset, the prospectus valued the technology at $3.2 billion, with projected licensing revenue of $400 million annually. Those projections were based on existing contracts that Lucas assumed he now controlled. At 9:23 p.m., I received a call from Dr. Anders Lindqvist, the Chief Technology Officer of Nordic Energy Solutions. His company operated 12 wind farms across Scandinavia, all running optimization software licensed through Ardent Grid. "Morgan, I need to ask you something directly," he said, his accent thick with concern. "We got a call from Helion today. They're claiming we need to renegotiate our licensing agreements at 10 times the current rate, or they'll terminate our access to the optimization algorithms." I set down my coffee cup. "What did you tell them?" "I told them we don't have agreements with Helion. We have agreements with Ardent Grid, and those agreements run for another 4 years." "That's correct. But they're saying Helion owns the technology now. They're saying you no longer have authority to maintain our contracts." I walked to my home office and opened my laptop. The Ardent Grid dashboard showed all Nordic energy contracts as active and current. No violations, no compliance issues, no pending modifications. "Anders, I need you to send me exactly what Helion told you. Forward any emails, document any phone calls, and copy me on any future communications." "Is there something I should know?" "There's something Lucas Dreyer should have known before he started making threats." I spent the next 2 days gathering intelligence. Through my network of former colleagues, industry contacts, and business partners, I built a complete picture of Helion's post-termination strategy. The pattern was clear and predictable. They were using the upcoming IPO as leverage to force renegotiation of every major contract at drastically higher rates. The strategy had one fatal flaw. They were negotiating contracts they didn't actually control. On Thursday morning, I received similar calls from energy companies in Germany, Australia, and Canada. The message was consistent. Helion was demanding immediate renegotiation of licensing agreements, claiming exclusive ownership of the optimization technology, and threatening to terminate access for non-compliance. By Thursday afternoon, I had documented 12 separate instances of Helion making fraudulent claims about intellectual property ownership. Each instance was a violation of federal regulations governing securities offerings. Each instance was also a breach of the ethical compliance clauses in the original licensing agreements. Lucas had spent 3 days systematically destroying the legal foundation of his own IPO. I made my decision that evening while reviewing the final set of compliance reports. Helion's stock was scheduled to begin trading in exactly 2 weeks. The company had already received $1.8 billion in pre-IPO investment commitments based on the projected value of technology they didn't actually own. More importantly, they were actively damaging relationships with the same companies that generated the revenue streams supporting their valuation. I opened the Ardent Grid administrative interface and began composing a series of automated notifications. The system I had built was designed to handle exactly this scenario. What happens when a sublicensee attempts to circumvent the primary rights holder? The answer was simple. The sublicense terminates automatically. At 11:47 p.m., I initiated the compliance review process for Helion Dynamics. The system generated a formal notice of violation, citing the removal of inventor attribution from patent filings and the misrepresentation of licensing authority to third parties. The notice included a 72-hour window for corrective action. I sent the notice to Lucas Dreyer's corporate email address, with copies to Helion's legal counsel and the Securities and Exchange Commission. Then I waited. Lucas called me at 6:15 a.m. on Friday morning. I was already awake, having spent the early hours monitoring network traffic and system status across all 48 licensed implementations. "Morgan, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "I'm listening." "I got your legal notice. I think there's been a misunderstanding." "About what?" "About ownership of the optimization algorithms, about the licensing agreements, about the structure of our business relationships." I poured myself a second cup of coffee while he continued. "Look, I know you're upset about the termination. I get it. But you can't hold the company hostage because you're angry about a personnel decision. I'm not holding anyone hostage. Lucas, I'm enforcing the terms of legally binding contracts. Contracts that were signed when you were a Helion employee. Contracts that should have been transferred to company control when you developed the technology on company time. Contracts that were signed between independent entities, using technology developed under my personal patent applications, with my own resources and laboratory facilities." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he had hung up. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "I want you to read the documentation I sent you. I want you to understand the legal position you've created for yourself, and I want you to stop making false claims about intellectual property ownership. The IPO is in 10 days. Morgan, we have investors. We have commitments. We have obligations. You have obligations to represent your assets accurately to investors. You have obligations to respect existing contracts with business partners. You have obligations to follow securities regulations. We can work something out. We can bring you back as a consultant, give you a percentage of the licensing revenue, put your name back on the patents." "You can't put my name back on the patents. Lucas, you can't undo the SEC filings claiming company ownership. You can't recall the fraudulent communications you've sent to our business partners." "Our business partners." "The 48 companies currently licensed to use optimization algorithms through Ardent Grid. The companies you've been threatening to cut off unless they agree to pay 10 times their current licensing fees." Another long silence. "Morgan, be reasonable. We both want the same thing here, a successful technology deployment that benefits everyone involved." "No. Lucas, you want to steal credit for work you didn't do. profit from innovations you didn't create, and destroy relationships you didn't build. That's not the same thing at all. I hung up without waiting for his response. The weekend passed quietly. I spent Saturday reviewing system logs and confirming that all non-Helion implementations remained stable and fully functional. I spent Sunday documenting the communication patterns between Helion and their licensing partners, building a comprehensive record of misrepresentation and fraud. On Monday morning, I received an email from the Securities and Exchange Commission acknowledging receipt of my complaint and requesting additional documentation. I provided everything: the original patent applications, the licensing agreements, the corporate structure of Ardent Grid, and the communication records showing Helion's false claims. On Tuesday, I received a call from Dr. Lindqvist in Stockholm. "Morgan, something strange is happening. We got another call from Helion yesterday, but this time they were asking about our contract terms with Ardent Grid. They wanted to know about termination clauses, about compliance requirements, about what would happen if licensing agreements were suspended." "What did you tell them?" "I told them to contact Ardent Grid directly if they had questions about our contracts." "But Morgan," they sounded worried. "Really worried?" "They should be. Is there something happening that we should know about? Our operations depend on this technology. We have contractual obligations to our own customers that we can't meet without the optimization algorithms. Your contracts with Ardent Grid remain in full effect. Anders, your technology access remains secure. Your operations will not be disrupted." "But what about Helion? What about their IPO? That's not your concern. Your concern is maintaining your energy production efficiency and meeting your obligations to Nordic power consumers. Nothing about that changes." On Wednesday, Lucas called me again. "Morgan, I need to understand something. I've been talking to our legal team, and they're telling me that Helion's licensing agreements are all structured as sublicenses through your company." "That's correct. They're telling me that if your company terminates our master license, all of our sublicensing agreements become invalid." "That's also correct. And they're telling me that our IPO prospectus represents assets that we don't actually control." Now you're beginning to understand the problem. This is insane. You can't destroy a $3 billion IPO because you're angry about getting fired. "I'm not destroying anything. Lucas, I'm enforcing the terms of contracts that existed long before you became CEO. I'm protecting intellectual property that belongs to me under law. I'm preventing securities fraud that would harm investors who trust your representations." What would it take to resolve this? Full correction of the patent records. Full disclosure to investors about the actual ownership structure. Full cessation of fraudulent claims to licensing partners. Complete withdrawal of threats against existing contract holders. And if we do all of that, then you can continue operating under your existing sublicense agreement at the rates and terms you agreed to 4 years ago. That's not enough to support the IPO valuation. Then maybe the IPO valuation was based on false premises. I hung up again. Thursday morning brought a cascade of developments. The SEC issued a formal inquiry into Helion's IPO documentation, requesting detailed information about intellectual property ownership and licensing revenue projections. 3 major investment banks postponed their final due diligence meetings pending resolution of asset control questions. The technology press began reporting on complications with Helion's public offering timeline. By Thursday afternoon, I had received calls from 14 different companies asking about the status of their licensing agreements. Word was spreading through the energy industry that Helion's ownership claims were being challenged, and that the reliability of optimization services might be in question. I spent the afternoon sending individual reassurances to each licensee, confirming that their contracts remained active and that their technology access would not be interrupted. I also sent each company a detailed technical support plan for the transition period, including direct contact information for Ardent Grid's engineering team. The engineering team consisted of me and 2 contractors, but they didn't need to know that. Friday morning, Lucas called me for the 3rd time that week. "Morgan, I want to make you an offer." "I'm listening." "Helion will purchase Ardent Grid for $500 million. You'll get the cash. We'll get clear title to the technology. and we can move forward with the IPO. No, it's a fair offer. It's more than fair. It's enough money to retire comfortably. It's not about the money. Lucas, then what is it about? I looked out my office window at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere in those buildings, engineers were working on problems that would shape the future of energy production. Somewhere in those buildings, corporate executives were making decisions about how to allocate resources and recognition for innovation. It's about making sure that innovation survives in an environment where credit goes to the people who deserve it. That's idealistic bullshit, Morgan. This is business. Exactly. This is business. And in business, you honor contracts, you respect intellectual property, and you don't lie to investors about what you own. Fine. What if we restructure the deal? What if we bring you back as Chief Technology Officer? What if we make you a partner in the IPO? You can't unring the bell, Lucas. You can't undo the patent manipulation. You can't take back the fraudulent communications. You can't restore trust with business partners you've already threatened. So what happens now? Now you have a choice. You can comply with the terms of your licensing agreement, operate as a sublicensee under Ardent Grid, and scale your IPO expectations to match your actual asset control. Or you can continue making false claims and face the consequences. What consequences? The consequences of operating critical infrastructure without proper licensing. The consequences of representing assets you don't own to public investors. The consequences of breach of contract across 17 countries. You're bluffing. I'm really not. The call ended with dial tone. Saturday morning, I made the decision that would change everything. I opened the Ardent Grid Management Console and navigated to the licensing control panel. 48 green status indicators showed active implementations across 4 continents. Every system was running smoothly. Every performance metric was optimal. Every contract was current, except for one. Helion Dynamics showed a red warning status. Compliance violation, final notice. I had given Lucas 72 hours to correct the patent records and cease fraudulent communications. The deadline had passed 6 hours ago. I clicked on the Helion Dynamics entry and selected Suspend License Compliance Violation. The system prompted me to confirm the action. This will immediately suspend all licensing privileges for Helion Dynamics and their subsidiaries. All sublicensing agreements will remain active under direct management. This action cannot be reversed without full compliance review. Confirm suspension. I confirmed. Within seconds, every server running Helion's implementation of my optimization algorithms received a shutdown command. Every grid optimization process that relied on their systems began switching to backup protocols. Every performance dashboard in their control centers started showing red warning lights. The technical beauty of the system I had built was that it failed gracefully. When Helion's access was suspended, the algorithms didn't simply stop working. They transferred control to backup systems operated directly by Ardent Grid. Energy production continued without interruption. Grid stability remained intact. Consumer power supplies weren't affected. But Helion's control over the process vanished instantly. My phone started ringing at 9:23 a.m. Lucas's number appeared on the screen. Morgan, what did you do? I enforced the terms of a licensing agreement. Everything is down. Every system, every dashboard, every optimization process. We have no control over any of our implementations. That's correct. You can't do this. We have obligations to our partners. We have commitments to investors. We have an IPO launching in 3 days. No, Lucas. You have sublicensing agreements that you violated. You have investors who were misled about asset ownership. You have an IPO based on false representations. Turn it back on. I can't do that. What do you mean you can't do that? I mean the licensing suspension was automatic, triggered by compliance violations that were documented over a 5-day period. The system is designed to prevent exactly this kind of intellectual property theft. We'll sue you. For what? Enforcing legally binding contracts, protecting intellectual property rights, preventing securities fraud, for sabotage, for corporate espionage, for destroying a public company. I haven't sabotaged anything. Every system continues to function normally under proper licensing. I haven't engaged in espionage. All of my actions have been documented and transparent. And I haven't destroyed any company. I've simply terminated an invalid sublicense agreement. Morgan, be reasonable. People are going to lose their jobs. Investors are going to lose their money. Projects are going to fail. People are going to lose their jobs because you built a business model on stolen intellectual property. Investors are going to lose their money because you lied to them about what you owned. Projects are going to fail because you prioritize short-term profit over long-term sustainability. What do you want? I want you to read the compliance report I sent you. I want you to understand that this situation is entirely the result of your own decisions. And I want you to stop calling me. I hung up. The rest of Saturday was quiet. I spent the afternoon monitoring system performance across all 48 active implementations. Every non-Helion system continued operating at full efficiency. Grid stability remained optimal. Energy production met all demand requirements. The only systems showing degraded performance were the ones that had been managed by Helion, and those were being smoothly transitioned to direct Ardent grid control. Sunday morning brought a flood of media coverage. The business press was reporting that Helion Dynamics had experienced technical difficulties that forced a postponement of their IPO. The energy industry publications were speculating about licensing disputes affecting major renewable energy projects. The technology blogs were discussing intellectual property controversies in the clean energy sector. None of the coverage mentioned my name, and none of it would. The corporate narrative was that Helion was experiencing internal operational challenges, not that they had been caught attempting to steal technology from a former employee. Sunday afternoon, I received an email from Dr. Lindqvist. Morgan, I wanted to thank you for the smooth transition. We received notification that Nordic Energy's licensing agreements have been transferred to direct management by Ardent Grid, with no changes to our terms or service levels. Your team handled the migration flawlessly. We didn't experience even a minute of downtime. Your team was me, working 18-hour days to ensure that every legitimate licensee maintained uninterrupted service. But Anders didn't need to know that. Sunday evening, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Blake, this is David Chen from the Securities and Exchange Commission. I'm calling about the complaint you filed regarding Helion Dynamics. Yes? We've completed our preliminary review of your documentation. We're going to be opening a formal investigation into the company's IPO filings and their representations to investors. We may need to interview you as part of that process. I'm available whenever you need me. There's something else. We've received reports that Helion's technology systems have been experiencing widespread failures. Do you know anything about that? I know that Helion's licensing agreement with Ardent Grid has been suspended due to compliance violations. I know that all other licensing agreements remain active and that no operational systems have been disrupted. I see. And you're the owner of Ardent Grid? I'm the majority shareholder and managing director. Ms. Blake, I need to ask this directly. Did you intentionally disable Helion's systems as retaliation for your termination? No, Mr. Chen. I terminated a licensing agreement due to documented violations of intellectual property rights and fraudulent misrepresentation to business partners. The termination was automatic, based on compliance clauses that were built into the original contract. And these compliance clauses were designed to protect against exactly this kind of situation? They were designed to ensure that intellectual property rights are respected and that technology licensing remains ethical and transparent. I understand. We'll be in touch if we need additional information. The call ended, but I knew it wouldn't be the last conversation I'd have with federal regulators. Monday morning brought the final act of Lucas's corporate drama. I was reviewing performance reports when my phone rang for the last time. Morgan, I need to see you in person. No. Lucas, we have nothing to discuss in person. I'm willing to negotiate. I'm willing to make concessions. But I need to understand what it would take to resolve this situation. It's too late for negotiations. You've already violated the licensing agreement. You've already filed false information with the SEC. You've already damaged relationships with business partners. The compliance review is complete. What if we offered you a settlement? What if we offered you a percentage of the company? You can't offer me a percentage of a company that doesn't own the technology it's trying to sell. Morgan, please, I'm trying to find a solution that works for everyone. The solution is simple, Lucas. Operate your business ethically. Respect intellectual property rights. Stop making false claims about ownership. Honor the contracts you've already signed. We can't do that. The IPO is based on projections that assume full control of the technology. If we don't own the licensing rights, the valuation falls apart. Then the valuation was never valid in the first place. You're destroying everything we've built. I'm not destroying anything. I'm revealing what was always true. That you built a business model on assets you didn't own, using technology you didn't create, making promises you couldn't keep. What happens now? Now you deal with the consequences of your own choices. You explain to your investors why you misrepresented your asset ownership. You negotiate with your business partners from a position of honesty rather than false claims. You restructure your company around what you actually control. And what about the technology? What about the optimization algorithms? The technology continues to operate exactly as it always has. The optimization algorithms continue to provide value to the companies that license them legitimately. The only thing that changes is that you're no longer in control of systems you never owned. Morgan, I'm asking you one more time. What would it take to fix this? I looked at my computer screen, where the Ardent Grid Management dashboard showed 48 active implementations running at optimal performance. Across 4 continents, energy systems were operating more efficiently because of algorithms I had developed over 14 years of research and innovation. None of those systems needed Lucas Dreyer. None of those systems needed Helion Dynamics. None of those systems needed corporate executives who prioritize profit over the ethics of innovation. It can't be fixed, Lucas. Some things, once broken, don't go back together. What do you mean? I mean that trust, once violated, doesn't heal. I mean that reputation, once damaged, doesn't recover. I mean that the foundation of business relationships is honesty. And you've demonstrated that honesty isn't a priority for you. So that's it? You're just going to let the company collapse? I'm not letting anything collapse. I'm allowing the natural consequences of unethical behavior to unfold. Companies that build their success on stolen intellectual property eventually face the reckoning that comes with that choice. Ozius, and what about you? What's your endgame here? My endgame is making sure that innovation survives in an environment where credit goes to the people who deserve it. My endgame is ensuring that the technology I developed continues to serve its intended purpose. My endgame is demonstrating that intellectual property rights matter, even when they're inconvenient for corporate executives. You're going to be tied up in legal battles for years. Maybe. But I have something you don't have. Lucas, I have the truth. I have documentation. I have contracts that were signed in good faith. I have a clear conscience. And I have a company to run. No, you don't. You have a company to liquidate. There's a difference. The line went quiet for a long moment. Morgan, I want you to know that I respected your work. I always respected your technical abilities. But you didn't respect me enough to honor the contracts that protected my intellectual property. You didn't respect me enough to be honest about ownership. You didn't respect me enough to maintain the ethical standards that make innovation possible. I was trying to build something bigger than any individual contribution. You were trying to steal credit for work you didn't do. You were trying to profit from innovations you didn't create. You were trying to build a fortune on a foundation of lies. I guess we see it differently. I guess we do. Lucas hung up without saying goodbye. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Chicago, reading the morning news on my laptop. The business section carried a small item about Helion Dynamics filing for bankruptcy protection after their IPO was canceled due to asset control irregularities. The company's investors were pursuing legal action against the management team for misrepresentation of intellectual property ownership. At the table next to me, Three college students were discussing a project for their renewable energy engineering class. One of them was explaining how optimization algorithms could improve the efficiency of wind farm operations. The really cool thing, she was saying, is that there's this open source framework called Ardent Core that provides all the basic optimization functions for free. You just have to agree to some ethical guidelines about not claiming ownership of work you didn't do. Her classmate nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, I heard about that. It's based on some really advanced algorithms that were developed by this engineer who got screwed over by her company. She released the core technology as open source so that no one could steal it again. That's brilliant, the third student said. It's like she found a way to make sure innovation belongs to everyone, instead of just the people with the most lawyers. I smiled and returned to my laptop. The Ardent Core project had launched 2 weeks ago, providing free access to the fundamental optimization algorithms for any organization that agreed to respect intellectual property rights and maintain ethical business practices. 43 companies had already signed licensing agreements under the new framework. Lucas had been right about one thing. Innovation was bigger than any individual contribution. But he had been wrong about who got to decide how that innovation was shared with the world. I opened the Ardent Grid Management Console and reviewed the latest performance metrics. Every system was running smoothly. Every implementation was operating at peak efficiency. Every partner was meeting their contractual obligations. At the bottom of the screen, a single line of code appeared in the system log. Innovation only survives when no one can steal it twice. I closed the laptop and walked out into the Chicago afternoon, leaving no trace of my presence except the quiet satisfaction of a job well done.